plain question went in. Natural language, no keywords. It answered, with clauses, with dates, with sources. Nothing flashy happened. This isn't a demo, it's an investigation into a capability that was already there, inside your tenant, governed by your rules. Contracts stopped acting like files and started answering back. No migrations, no new platform, just the same SharePoint, now asked differently. We'll show what the system did, what the logs showed, and what changed, and what didn't. The mistake that creates blind spots and the one switch that removes them. Only the question changed. Premise: storage versus answers. The hidden cost of manual search. Every organization has contracts. Hundreds, thousands. You already know what happens next. They're stored carefully. Libraries, folders, subfolders. Then the emails start. Do we have an NDA with them? When does the MSA renew? Is indemnity mutual? Search opens. Filters stack. Someone rereads the same PDF for the third time this quarter. Most tenants treat SharePoint like a vault. Strong walls, clear shelves, labels everywhere. A good vault preserves. It does not respond. And that's the gap that quietly taxes every team. Latency between question and answer. Latency shows up as pings to legal, as stale spreadsheets trying to be registers, as version drift when an attachment cycles through 3 inboxes and returns with a single red line nobody noticed. It shows up as missed notice windows because the calendar was owned by ContractSat and that mailbox was deprovisioned last year. Storage is stable, answers are slow. The thing most people miss is simple. Manual search is cumulative. Each reread is a small cost that compounds. 2 minutes here to check governing law, 5 minutes there to confirm a renewal term. It feels quick. At scale, it isn't. Across a quarter, across a portfolio, it becomes days. Days that hide inside. Can you just check? Errors originate in that fog. Version drift is a storage symptom disguised as a collaboration habit. Missed renewals aren't failures of policy, they're failures of detection. Clause misreads aren't about legal skill, they're about fatigue, context switching, and the subtle bias of, I think I remember this template. Now, here's where the premise divides. Storage thinking asks, where is the file? Answer thinking asks, what does the file say? Storage thinking optimizes for place. Answer thinking optimizes for precision. One moves boxes better, the other reduces questions. In the tenant we observed, the storage story was textbook. SharePoint Online. Libraries per contract type. Sensitivity labels applied. Retention labels for record states. Permissions respected down to the folder. A drop-off library for intake. All correct. All compliant. Nothing wrong with it. But every real question still depended on someone reading. And reading is slow. Why? Nothing new was installed matters. Governance. The contracts lived under existing permissions. Purview labels already in place. Audit logs already recording. Retention rules already decided by policy, not by a project. If the answers could emerge inside that frame, without exporting, without replatforming, then speed would increase and risk would decrease at the same time, without changing the control plane. That's the claim worth testing. The better method starts where storage ends. Contracts enter as documents. They become data without leaving SharePoint. Intake stays in a drop-off library. AI document processing extracts the known truths. Parties, dates, renewal logic, payment terms, governing law. Columns autofill, not a custom app, not a detour to a vendor silo, just columns in the library you already had. The reason this works is boring and powerful. Column values can be asked. Not searched, asked. A question that sounds like a human question. Show agreements expiring in the next 60, 90 days. Or which NDAs expire in the next 30 days. Or where is indemnity non-mutual? Answered with citations, not summaries, not guesses. Pointers back to the lines that matter. Once answers cite, trust shifts. Verification stops being a full reread and becomes a click on the source. The cycle time collapses. What took days falls to minutes. The emails to legal taper. The shared trackers go quiet. People stop asking where the file is and start asking better questions of the files they can already access. The signal is subtle, fewer questions, faster decisions. The contracts didn't change, only the question did. And the stakes are not academic. Compliance requires repeatability, finance requires predictability, auditors require evidence that what you claim is what the system does every time. If the answers are grounded in your content, your labels, your audit logs, then credibility rises because nothing informal is carrying the load. It's not a hero effort, it's a system behavior. So if storage isn't the problem, the interface to truth is. Keyboard search was a workaround for documents that couldn't respond. Natural language with citations is an interface that treats the repository as a knowledge source. The walls remain, the shelves remain, the labels remain, but the contract can now answer back, inside the same room, under the same lights, watched by the same cameras. Nothing was replaced, nothing was migrated. Only the question changed. Evidence 1. Contracts enter as data without leaving SharePoint. In this case, intake looked ordinary. A drop-off library, standard permissions, drafts visible to the few who needed them. No email detours, no shared drives. A contract arrived and landed where contracts always land. What happened next wasn't a handoff, it was extraction. AI document processing read the file. Not just the title, not just the file name, it read the agreement. Parties, effective date, expiration, renewal terms, notice windows, payment terms, governing law. It filled columns that already existed in the library. Autofill touched metadata. Governance didn't move. No connector out, no copy to a vendor system. The document never left SharePoint. Your existing permissions stayed in charge. Your sensitivity label stayed on the file. Retention labels stayed mapped. The audit log recorded who uploaded, who viewed, which columns changed. Your tenant, your rules. The same room, just quieter. A small example made the point. 2 NDAs dropped within minutes, both 1-year terms, different counterparties. The library gained 4 values per file without human typing. Counterparty, effective date, term end, renewal logic. The calculated column turned that into days to expiry, and a view surfaced expiring in 30. The list populated itself. Nothing flashy happened. Then came the clauses, termination, indemnity, assignment. The processor marked the spans. Not summaries, exact text ranges. When a field read indemnity, mutual, a link beside it opened the paragraph that proved it. When it read auto renewal, yes, the notice window column carried 60 days prior, grounded in the sentence that governed it. Answers pointed back to sources. Verification became a click. Purview wasn't bypassed. It continued to enforce what it already enforced. Record labels remained immutable where policy required it. Draft security still hid what drafts should hide. Data loss prevention rules still watched for sensitive data in motion. This mattered because nothing about control changed. Only the availability of answers changed. Once columns held truth, questions changed form. Find the SOWs pending signature beyond 7 days. The library had a signature status metadata value because the e-signature workflow wrote back status on completion. The query returned items, each item linked to version history and an approval trail. The answer was operational, not theoretical. We saw it again with vendor agreements. Payment terms weren't just read, they were stored. Net 30, net 45, advance. A PowerBI evidence view, bound directly to the library, showed patterns across 12 months. Not a dashboard for show. A wall of repeated facts. Which vendors deviated from standard terms, which agreements carried auto-renewal with less than 60-day notice, which jurisdictions dominated governing law. It was the same data the library held rendered as patterns. The evidence kept repeating. The security story didn't move. The files sat in the same site. The site lived under the same sensitivity. The columns belonged to the same content type. Drafts remained drafts. Records remained records. What changed was density. A single file now carried answers the system could cite. Multi-document reasoning emerged without theatrics. Show agreements expiring in the next 60-90 days. The view filtered by calculated expiry. Where indemnity is non-mutual. The extraction model wrote mutual no. The knowledge agent returned the list and cited each source paragraph. It didn't guess, it didn't approximate, it cited exact clauses, returned specific dates, listed precise sources. A quiet moment in the logs confirmed the behavior. Upload recorded. Extraction event logged as a column update by the processing service identity. No external access entries, no sharing links created. When a user asked a question, the query event captured who asked, what was answered, and which files were referenced. The trail was intact. Drop-off libraries mattered more than they seemed. Intake discipline created predictable structure. Required minimal metadata on arrival. The rest followed automatically. People spent less time naming things, more time asking things. The effect wasn't speed alone. It was consistency. The same columns existed across NDAs, MSAs, SOWs, and DPAs. Different templates, same truths. There was a temptation to call this a new system. It wasn't. It was the old system revealing more of itself. SharePoint held the files. AI document processing wrote the facts to columns. Knowledge agent answered questions with citations. PowerBI showed patterns of those same facts over time. Power Automate moved a few approvals, wrote a few statuses back. Purview kept its hand on everything. The contracts didn't change. The intake didn't change. The governance didn't change. The questions did. And because the questions changed, answers appeared where storage used to end. Asking the system, natural language, citations, and contract grounding, the question moved first, not the file. Show agreements expiring in 60-90 days. A plain sentence, no operators, no advanced syntax. The SharePoint knowledge agent treated it like a request for facts, not a search for files. It inspected the library's columns. It applied the filter the way a person would. It returned a list. Each row carried a citation icon. Click once and the agent opened the contract. Not to the cover page, to the sentence that governed expiry. Exact span, highlighted. The answer didn't stand alone. It stood on a source. Clause level matters because contracts are written to be specific. A question like, is indemnity mutual? Is not a category question. It's a line of text question. The agent's response came back with two parts. A short direct answer, and a set of citations pointing to the indemnity paragraph in each contract. It didn't paraphrase, it didn't interpret, it presented the literal text it relied on. We pushed it. List all agreements where notice of non-renewal must be given more than 60 days prior. The agent returned the candidates. It cited the sentences that forced that window. It also flagged a few with ambiguous phrasing. The thing most people miss is the value of ambiguity detection. The agent didn't decide. It exposed uncertainty with the same precision it exposed certainty. Humans stayed in the loop by choice, not by necessity. Multi-document reasoning appeared as soon as the question spanned types. Across NDAs and MSAs, show those with auto-renewal and less than 60-day notice. This crossed templates, counterparties, and years. The agent didn't conflate structure. It leaned on extracted values. Auto-renewal, yes. Notice window 830 or 45 or 60. It filtered on those facts. Then it cited, per document, the exact clause that produced those facts. Verification was one click away 50 times in a row without fatigue. Why citations matter is simple. Trust doesn't scale on summaries, it scales on reproducibility. When the answer carries its own evidence, audit becomes a review of links, not a relitigation of process. According to the logs, each answer stored the question, the identity of the asker, the list of files referenced, and the spans cited. That's a trail an auditor can follow. That's also a trail a skeptic can test. A microstory made it clear. Legal asked, show all MSAs where limitation of liability excludes indirect damages. The agent returned the small set. Each item expanded to the paragraph that excluded consequential or incidental damages. One contract used a carve-out for data loss. The agent cited that carve-out separately. The human decision remained human, but discovery time dropped from hours to minutes because the question arrived with the evidence attached. Now here's where most people mess up. They assume the content got smarter. It didn't. The content got questionable. The library already held the columns. The extraction model already wrote values. The agent already knew how to answer in natural language. The only change was behavior. Stop searching for file names, start asking for facts with citations. We also saw limit cases where governing law is New York and indemnity is unilateral. The agent found them. It flagged one where indemnity looked mutual until a later sentence narrowed the scope. It cited both places. It didn't resolve the tension. It surfaced it. That's decision support, not automation. There was a moment when finance asked a pattern question. Show vendors with payment terms outside our standard net 30. The agent produced the list, grouped by net 45, net 60 advance. It linked each variance to the exact term text. Then the PowerBI evidence view showed the same list over the last 4 quarters. No new data, just repetition over time. The evidence kept repeating. Grounding never broke governance. Permissions trimmed results to the asker's access. A viewer saw only what they were already allowed to see. Sensitivity labels persisted. Retention labels remained visible in the item detail. The answer respected the walls. It only walked the aisles faster. We asked a human-sounding question. Which SOWs have been awaiting signature more than 7 days? The agent cross-referenced signature status and signature date columns. It returned the set. Each item included a link to version history and the approval event. No one guessed. No one forwarded a PDF. The system answered with receipts. The subtle shift was cognitive. People stopped asking, where is the document? And started asking, what does the document oblige us to do? The first is location. The second is liability. That's a better conversation for every function. Alternate explanations were tested. Could metadata alone have done this? Possibly, but metadata doesn't explain clause-level citations. Could an Excel tracker have done it? Maybe for a month. But trackers don't enforce citations and they drift. The tenant's outcome depended on one behavior. Ask the repository questions as if it knew the text. In every case, the contracts didn't move. The governance didn't change. The answers arrived with their own grounding. It didn't guess. It didn't approximate. It cited exact clauses, returned specific dates, listed precise sources. Use case 1. NDAs, volume, velocity, and quiet expiration. Every tenant has them. Hundreds, sometimes thousands. Short, simple, necessary. NDAs move fast, then go quiet. That quiet is where risk hides. In this case, intake didn't change. A drop-off library received the flow. Minimal required metadata on arrival. Counterparty name, business owner. Draft state contained. The extraction model did the rest. It read dates, it read terms. It wrote effective date, expiry date, renewal logic, notice window. 4 fields, no ceremony. Cycle time shifted the minute those values existed. The question wasn't who owns this file. It was which NDAs expire in the next 30 days. The knowledge agent returned a list. Names, dates, citations. One click opened the exact clause that defined the end date. Another click showed the notice requirement. Humans didn't reread, they verified. Volume made the difference obvious. 50 NDAs uploaded in a week. The view expiring in 30 populated itself. No spreadsheet, no monthly export. A calculated column measured days to expiry. A saved view filtered. A person asked. An answer appeared. With sources, the evidence kept repeating. Quiet expiration is a pattern, not a story. NDAs rarely carry penalties, but they do carry obligations. Post-termination confidentiality doesn't end with the term. A quick question. Which expired NDAs include post-term confidentiality? Produced a small set. The agent cited each survival clause. Legal saw the same sentences the system relied on. Risk review became minutes, not afternoons. Velocity matters. Deals move. New counterparties arrive. The intake discipline held. A new NDA dropped. Columns filled. If the counterparty's template used 1 year from effective date, the model wrote the exact date. If it used until the later of, the agent flagged ambiguity. It didn't pretend to know. It surfaced the edge, linked to the text, and stopped. Humans stayed in the loop where language was tricky. Errors stopped looking like mistakes. They looked like absences that didn't happen. No missed renewals because the list for expiring in 30 never needed curation. No wrong version signed because draft security and version history were visible inside the same item pane. No misread termination because answers always carried their citations back to the line that controlled it. A simple metric told the story without a graph. The time to answer, do we have an NDA with them and is it current, fell from days to minutes. The ask landed in the same tenant against the same library, returning the same evidence every time. Latency disappeared because nobody went hunting. They asked, the system answered, with receipts. Adoption showed up as silence. Shared trackers went stale and stayed that way. Email chains asking, anyone have the latest NDA with X? Slowed, then stopped. The internal habit changed. People still worked with files, but they stopped treating files as the only path to facts. A short list in a view became the first stop. Not because someone trained them, but because it was faster. Governance never blinked. Permissions trimmed outputs. Sensitivity labels persisted. Retention labels stayed visible, and where an NDA was a record, it remained immutable. Purview's rules still enforced the same policies. The intake was compliant before. It remained compliant after. The only change was that answers lived in the same place compliance did. We watched the quarter turn. The expiring in 30 view emptied and filled again, driven by dates, not by effort. A PowerBI evidence view sat on the wall. Counts by week, expiries by business unit, average notice windows by counterparty. Patterns, not dashboards for show. The wall didn't predict. It confirmed. The evidence kept repeating. Alternate explanations were considered. Could a disciplined spreadsheet have done this? For a few weeks, maybe. But spreadsheets don't enforce citations, and they don't respect permissions. Could email reminders solve it? Only if the calendar owner never leaves and the register never drifts. Neither explanation fits clause-level grounding across volume. One micro-event closed the loop. A sales lead asked, is their NDA still active for next week's workshop? The agent returned yes, cited the expiry clause, and highlighted the survival language covering confidential information after termination. The reply carried links, not attachments. No one printed, no one searched, no one guessed. The NDAs didn't become important. They already were. They became answerable inside the same room, under the same lights, watched by the same cameras. Nothing was replaced, nothing was migrated, only the question changed. Use Case 2, vendor agreements, MSAs, financial terms and renewal risk. Money hides in the middle of these. Not the signature, the middle, payment terms, notice windows, auto-renewals that don't announce themselves. In this case, nothing exotic happened at intake. The MSA landed in the same site. The library columns were already there. AI document processing read what mattered for finance and legal, payment terms, billing cadence, discounts, auto-renewal, notice period, limitation of liability, governing law. It wrote them. Columns filled. The file stayed put. The first question was simple and expensive. Show MSAs with auto-renewal and less than 60-day notice. The knowledge agent returned the candidates. Each line carried a citation. Click and you were in the clause that controlled renewals. Some said, shall automatically renew for successive one-year terms unless either party provides written notice at least 30 days prior. Some hid a 45-day window halfway through a paragraph about termination. The answer didn't summarize. It pointed. Then payment terms. List vendors with terms outside net 30. The column held net 45, net 60 advanced. The agent grouped by variance. Each variance linked to the precise text. Finance didn't argue the list. They saw the sentences. The conversation moved from do we have this to do we accept this? Errors stopped by not starting. No missed auto-renewals because the expiring in 60/90 view included the auto-renewed contracts with short notice. No accidental rollovers because the notice window was a column, not a memory. The approval trail lived beside the file. Nobody forwarded the final version from a mailbox with a slightly older date. A microstory told the consequence. A vendor MSA carried a 30-day notice on renewal and net 60 payments. The old habit was to remember the headline and miss the fine print. The agent returned both. It cited the 30-day sentence and the payment paragraph. The PowerBI evidence view showed 10 more like it over the year. Not a spike, a pattern. The evidence kept repeating. We tested multi-document reasoning where stakes intersect. Across MSAs and SOWs, show those with auto-renewal, yes, notice, 60, and payment terms net 30. The agent filtered on facts already extracted. It returned the set. Each row opened the governing sentences. One SOW referenced the MSA for payment terms. The agent cited the cross-reference and the source paragraph in the MSA. The thread held without leaving the tenant. Limitation of liability sat where finance and legal meet. List MSAs where liability cap excludes indirect damages but includes a carve-out for data loss. The agent produced a very small set. It cited the exclusion first, then the carve-out. No one debated what it said. They debated whether to accept it. Decision support, not automation. PowerBI stayed boring on purpose. A wall of repeated facts. Count of MSAs by payment term. Count with short notice windows. Distribution of governing law. A simple visual flagged vendors deviating from standard terms over 4 quarters. Not a dashboard for show. Evidence over time. The evidence kept repeating. Alternate explanations were raised. Could a disciplined register have caught these? Maybe, for a moment. But registers don't cite clauses and they drift with every copy. Could email rules remind owners? Only if every owner remains and every reminder survives migration. Neither explains a list that arrives with links to the line that governs money. Governance never moved. The site's sensitivity label applied. Retention labels stayed visible. Records remained immutable where required. Permissions trimmed outputs. A project manager saw only the MSAs they were allowed to see. The agent respected the walls. It only walked the aisles faster. Legal asked a skeptical question. What happens when language is ambiguous? Unless otherwise agreed in the applicable SOW appears 3 times. The agent didn't resolve it. It surfaced the references. It cited each place SO precedence was invoked. Humans examined the SOWs. The system accelerated the path to the right pages. Process containment mattered. E-signature completed inside Microsoft 365. Power Automate wrote back signature status it was complete. Execution date, signer. The items version history showed the approval event. Nothing left the tenant. No one downloaded a PDF to desktop to circulate for visibility. The answer lived with its receipts. Cycle time dropped where money meets calendars. Which MSAs require notice in the next 45 days to avoid renewal? The agent returned the list. Each item included the notice sentence. A mail merge didn't happen. A question did. A decision did. Minutes, not days. The quiet win showed up in silence. Fewer urgent pings before quarter close. Fewer late exceptions to payment policy. Fewer escalations because a renewal rolled over unchallenged. When people stopped asking, something changed. Here, the change was that the system answered with the text that would have been reread. The MSAs didn't become transparent. They were always explicit. The tenant stopped treating that explicitness as a reading assignment. It became a column. It became a question. It became an answer with a citation. Nothing was replaced. Nothing was migrated. Only the question changed. Use case 3. Statements of work. Process delays without leaving M365. Operational friction doesn't hide in clauses. It hides in handoffs. SOWs prove it. In this tenant, nothing fancy happened at intake. SOW drafts landed in the same site. The content type already carried fields for project counterparty value, start, end, and a few that matter when people have to act. Signature status, awaiting role, days in state. AI document processing read the scope and dates, wrote the basics, and stepped aside. Governance stayed put. Drafts remained drafts. Where work stalled wasn't content, it was movement. Email approvals, detached PDFs, a last-minute red line lost in a reply all. The fix wasn't a new tool, it was containment. E-signature ran inside Microsoft 365. Word generated the signature packet. Approvers received it through the same identity they used for everything else. Power Automate recorded completion back to the item. Signature status X awaiting client, then awaiting internal, then complete. Version history tied edits to events. No file detours, no silent forks. The question shifted from who has the doc to which SOWs have been awaiting signature more than 7 days. The knowledge agent answered by reading columns, not guesses. It returned the list, filtered by days in state 7 and signature status X awaiting client or awaiting internal. Each item expanded to show the last approval action, the timestamp, and the version where it paused. A link opened the current draft at the signature block. Operational evidence, not narrative. Latency exposed itself in numbers. One SOW sat awaiting internal for 9 days. The agent showed who the approver was when they were notified. And the last comment, it didn't arbitrate. It surfaced the lane where the delay lived. Another stalled awaiting client across a holiday. The status carried the external send date. No one speculated, no one hunted an inbox. A view turned it into a row with receipts. We saw the same pattern when scope changed. A project manager revised a milestone. Word tracked the delta. The approval flow reran automatically because scope changed. It was yes. The library wrote back, awaiting internal again. The agent answered, which SOWs re-entered approval due to scope change in the last 14 days? The list appeared, each item linked to the red line that triggered it. The conversation moved from blame to sequence. Process containment mattered more than speed. Nothing left the tenant. No one downloaded final V3 signed PDF to a desktop. The signed copy saved to the same library with signature status X complete, execution date, and signer. Version history showed the approval event. Purview labels remained. Record state applied on execution where policy required it. Audit logs captured the run. Who sent, who signed, which file when. Your existing governance was still there the whole time. A micro-story made it tangible. A regional SOW bounced between 2 internal approvers for 5 days over a minor budget note. The agent showed days in state equal 5 under awaiting internal with 2 comments. The project lead pinged the owner with a link to the item, not the file. The approver opened the draft in Word online, accepted the trivial change, and the flow advanced. Minutes, not more emails. The document never left the room. We tested multi-SOW queries. Show all SOWs awaiting client signature more than 7 days, grouped by counterparty. The agent returned the set. It cited the external send date stored in the item. A PowerBI evidence view on the wall showed the same delays by quarter, by team, by counterparty. Not to shame, to repeat. The evidence kept repeating. Alternate explanations surfaced and fell away. Could a shared mailbox have managed this? Possibly for a little while. But shared mailboxes don't write days in state, and they don't tie status to version events. Could a separate e-signature portal have done it? Maybe. but it would have pulled the file out of the tenant and split the trail. Neither explains answers that carried logs, versions, and signatures in one place. Errors avoided were quiet. No wrong version signed because version history was the source of truth, visible alongside status. No lost attachments because nothing left the library. No finals sitting behind a person's mailbox vacation rule. Cycle time improved by subtraction. Fewer detours, fewer forwards, fewer checking in emails. The subtle shift was diagnostic. People stopped arguing over documents and started acting on states. The content didn't block, the process did. Once the system exposed state with receipts, delays moved from guesswork to queue work. Statements of work didn't change. The way we asked about them did. Use case 4, DPAs compliance agreements. Exposure without drama. Regulatory obligations don't yell. They sit in the middle of the document and wait. Data processing agreements prove it. Intake didn't change. A DPA arrived through the same drop-off library. Minimal required metadata, counterparty business owner. The extraction model read what compliance and security always chase later. Data categories, processing purposes, sub-processor disclosures, transfer mechanisms, incident notification windows, governing jurisdiction, standard contractual clauses references. Columns filled, the file stayed put, governance stayed on. The first question wasn't legal theory, it was exposure. Show DPA's missing standard indemnity. The knowledge agent returned the subset. Each line carried a citation to the liability and indemnity section. Where indemnity deviated or was absent, the agent highlighted the paragraph that proved it. Legal didn't reread to discover. They reread to decide. Subprocessors were next. List DPAs that reference third-party subprocessors without an up-to-date disclosure schedule. The model had written a simple Boolean, subprocessors, yes, no, and a schedule present column. The agent filtered and cited. It linked the schedule reference, and where the schedule was missing, it pointed to the passage requiring notice on changes. Compliance didn't chase email trails. They opened the clauses. Transfers matter because regulators care. Show DPAs relying on standard contractual clauses for transfers to third countries. The column held transfer mechanism ISL SCC. The agent grouped by version year referenced in the text. It cited the annex. One agreement used an older SCC reference. The agent surfaced both the outdated citation and the governing sentence. No alarms, just receipts. Incident windows surfaced quietly. List DPAs where security incident notification exceeds 72 hours. The column carried breach notice window, hours. Anything above 72 was flagged. The agent pointed to the sentence promising 5 business days, or without undue delay. Legal saw the exact phrasing that would be evaluated after a breach. Exposure wasn't hypothetical, it was a number with a source. Jurisdiction and supervisory authority aligned with where complaints land. Across DPAs governed by Ireland show those with unilateral audit rights. The extracted values handled both. Governing law is Ireland. Audit rights is unilateral mutual third-party certification. The agent returned the list with citations to the audit clause. No one argued whether an ISO certificate was enough. They read the sentence that said it. Record management never blinked. Where DPAs were labeled as records, they remained immutable. Where sensitivity labels applied, they persisted. Retention labels were visible in the item pane, including event-based retention when policy used contract expiry to start the clock. Purview didn't take a day off just because answers arrived faster. Your existing governance was still there the whole time. A microstory made risk concrete. Security asked, which DPAs require us to notify the counterparty without undue delay and also cap our liability to fees paid in the last 12 months? The agent filtered on notice window equals undue delay and liability cap x 12 months fees. It returned a very small set and cited both clauses for each result. The conversation moved from, is that true, to do we accept that? Minutes, not meetings. Ambiguity showed up where it should. Where are data deletion obligations tied to termination or expiry, whichever is later, within a reasonable period? The agent surfaced the phrase, cited it, and flagged reasonable period unspecified. It didn't judge, it annotated uncertainty so humans could. Decision support, not automation. We looked at subprocessors again, this time as patterns. A PowerBI evidence view bound to the same library, showed counts of DPAs with explicit subprocessor lists versus references to public web pages. It tracked over 2 quarters how often advance notice versus post facto notification appeared, not a dashboard for show. A wall of repeated facts, the evidence kept repeating. Alternate explanations appeared and fell away. Could a manual register track these obligations? Possibly for a while. But registers don't cite the sentences that regulators will read, and they drift with every copy. Could external CLM do it better? It might, but then you move governance, permissions, and audit into a different plane. Here, the answer lived where the control already lived. Process containment protected the trail. External signature didn't pull the file out. The executed DPA saved back into the same library with signature status equal complete, execution date, and signer. Conversion history showed the approval and execution events. Audit logs captured the flow. Who asked, what was answered, which files were referenced. If a regulator ever asked, how do you know, the system had an answer with receipts. A quiet contrast clarified the change. At the time, teams thought this was search. What we know now is that it wasn't. It was questioning. Search returns files. Questioning returns obligations with citations. The contract didn't change, only the question did. Cycle time dropped where it matters most, the time between do we comply and show me. Legal stopped assembling emailed PDFs. Security stopped waiting for someone to confirm a notice window. Compliance stopped guessing which SCC annex applied. A single query returned the set. Each item linked to the line that would be argued in a hearing. Minutes replaced afternoons. The soft signal appeared again. Fewer escalation emails at quarter end, fewer urgent messages before audits, fewer spreadsheet registers pretending to be systems. When people stop asking, something changed. Here the change was that DPAs answered back, under the same lights, on the same shelves, governed by the same rules. Nothing was replaced, nothing was migrated. Exposure didn't produce drama. It produced citations, mechanics, not magic, how the pieces quietly work together. The stack was ordinary. SharePoint held the libraries. Knowledge agent answered questions with citations. Document processing extracted facts. PowerBI showed patterns. Power Automate moved a few handoffs. Purview governed all of it. No hero product, no sidecar database, just standard parts doing what they already do, in sequence. Start at the shelf. SharePoint libraries, content types, columns. Names you already know, effective date, expiration date, auto-renewal, notice window, payment terms, governing law, signature status. Nothing exotic. Columns exist to carry truth, not decoration. Views exist to narrow focus, not entertain. Permissions trim what's visible. Sensitivity and retention labels travel with the file. That's the room. Then the reading. Document processing for Microsoft 365 or AI Builder where that's preferred. It picks up the file in place, reads the text, writes the fields you asked it to write. Parties, dates, renewal logic, clauses. It does that as a column update, not a content rewrite. The output is structured, the file stays intact. The service identity appears in the audit log with the change event. That's the extraction. Now the questions. SharePoint Knowledge Agent sits near the content. A plain sentence lands. Show MSAs with auto-renewal and notice less than 60 days. The agent resolves that to filters on the columns the processor already wrote. It returns rows. Each row carries a citation icon back to the exact span in the file. It doesn't paraphrase. It doesn't produce a memo. It produces an answer with a pointer. That's grounding. When the answer spans documents, nothing doubles. The agent works across the same library or a defined set of libraries, respecting permissions. Across NDAs and MSAs, list indemnity non-mutual. The filter runs on extracted values. The citations come from each file's clause span. There's no corpus shipped to a side index. There's no copy in a vendor cloud. That's containment. PowerBI sits on the same truth. It binds to the library as a source. Columns that already exist, not a parallel register. It doesn't invent KPIs. It shows patterns, counts by notice window, payment term distributions, expiries by quarter, auto-renewal prevalence. No drill circus, a wall that repeats what the library already knows over time. That's the evidence wall. Power Automate does the minimum required to close loops. E-signature inside Microsoft 365 writes status back, awaiting client, awaiting internal, complete, plus execution date, signer. Approval actions log to the item as comments or history entries. When scope changes, a flag flips, the flow reruns, the state returns to awaiting internal. The document never leaves. That's the handoff. Purview never steps aside. Sensitivity labels enforce what they always enforced. Record labels lock what policy declares immutable. Retention triggers fire on events you already defined. Execution date, expiry date. DLP watches in motion, same as before. Audit logs capture who asked, who viewed, which columns changed, which files were cited. The guardrails didn't move to accommodate answers. Answers appeared within guardrails. That's governance continuity. Two roles matter in practice. The site owner cares about structure and hygiene, content types, columns, required fields, views that reflect work. The information protection admin cares about labels, retention, DLP, and audit. Neither becomes a developer, neither runs migrations. They agree on names for columns and let the services fill them. Scaling isn't a feature, it's an absence of special cases. NDAs, MSAs, SOWs, DPAs, different templates, same backbone. Drop-off libraries stabilize intake. Minimal required fields at arrival reduce early friction. Processors write the rest. Views normalize retrieval. Agent answers normalize questioning. BI normalizes repetition. The same pattern everywhere. What about accuracy? Clause spans are literal. If the text is unusual, the model flags ambiguity. Reasonable period becomes an explicit note. Unless otherwise agreed in the applicable SOW, becomes a cross-reference you can click. The system doesn't infer intent, it exposes structure. Humans adjudicate edge cases with the text already open. What about security drift? There isn't any. No connectors copy files out. No exports to CSV to feed dashboards. No shadow CLM standing beside governance. SharePoint remains the store. Labels remain the policy. The processing identity is a service you already authorized inside your tenant. The knowledge agent uses your permissions, not its own. The answers you see are the answers you're allowed to see. Failure modes are ordinary too. A new column name that diverges from pattern slows questions until alignment returns. A missing drop-off discipline adds noise to intake until required fields are restored. A flow that stopped after a change shows in run history and version history. The item tells on itself. Fixes are administrative, not architectural. The reason this feels like magic is rhythm. Intake, extract, ask, cite, decide, repeat. Each step is simple. Together, they create a surface where questions land and evidence comes back. No ceremony, no theater, just mechanics doing what mechanics do quietly under governance you already trust. Second look, what we thought was search versus what was actually answering. At the time, the model looked new, a switch got flipped, a capability appeared. That's how it felt. What we know now is quieter. Search expectations were doing most of the talking. People typed file names because that's what file systems taught them. They stacked filters because that's what keyword engines rewarded. The habit was location, not meaning. The repository didn't change. The interface to truth did. When columns carried facts, the question stopped being find and became ask. The difference is not cosmetic. Find tolerates drift. Ask requires precision. Find returns candidates. Ask returns a claim with its source. That's why latency collapsed without theatrics. We thought the boost came from AI. The lift came from structure. Clause spans made evidence portable. Columns made patterns computable. The agent did something simple and hard at the same time. It treated the library like a table of facts, then refused to answer without a citation. It didn't guess, it didn't approximate. It cited exact clauses, returned specific dates, listed precise sources. Second look at the logs made the illusion obvious. No new pipes, no exports, no mirrors, upload, extract columns, ask, cite, decide, repeat. The audit trail read like a metronome. The only spike was in questions with receipts. There's a gap worth naming. Search invites confidence early and regret late. You feel fast until you reread the file to be sure. Answers invert that. You feel slower for a second, a click into a clause, and then you stop rereading. Confidence arrives with the evidence, not after it. That's why the silence showed up in inboxes. Fewer follow-ups, fewer just checking threads. Curiosity stayed ahead of explanation. Another gap. We assumed smarter content. But what we measured was fewer places for error to hide. The same NDAs, the same MSAs, the same DPAs, different behavior. People stopped treating memory as a system. They let the system remember. Columns carried the obvious truths. Spans carried the controlling lines. The wall repeated both over time. The lingering question is whether this was novelty. It wasn't. The cadence kept time across quarters. New documents landed. The same columns filled. The same questions produced the same shapes. The same citations opened to the same kinds of sentences. The evidence kept repeating. So what was actually answering? Not a chatbot, not a parallel index. A governed store whose contents were promoted to facts. And an agent that refused to separate an answer from its source. Search expectations created the theater. The system was already doing the work. The surprise is that nothing flashy needed to happen. The room stayed the room. The shelves stayed the shelves. The guards stayed at their posts. Only the question changed. And when it did, the repository started answering back like it had always been ready to. Verifying the claim, what the logs showed. The files stayed where they were. The only question was whether the system behaved the way it claimed. The audit trail answered that. Upload events came first. Each contract showed a created operation by a human identity, time-stamped with the site, library, and item URL. No mystery accounts, no external IPs, just the person who dropped it into the drop-off library under existing permissions. Draft security applied immediately. The visibility field reflected only users who can edit items. Nothing flashy happened. Extraction appeared as column updates, not edits to the file, edits to metadata. The actor wasn't a person. It was the document processing service identity authorized in the tenant. Operation, file modified, column updated, effective date, expiration date, auto-renewal, notice window, payment terms, governing law. The before-after pairs showed null to value transitions. The checksum of the file content did not change. Governance didn't move. Only the columns did. Label continuity was explicit. The sensitivity label column listed the existing label. The record status reflected unlocked for drafts, locked on execution where policy required it. No label change events occurred during extraction. Retention details showed the same policy with event-based triggers tied to execution date for items designated as contracts. Purview kept its hand on everything. Question events surfaced next. The knowledge agent recorded who asked, when, and the exact phrasing. Operation Copilot query. Scope, this library. Filters derived from columns. Response objects included a list of item IDs referenced and the clause span ranges cited. For the NDA expiry query, each answer stored the effective date, expiration date, and the span offset where the sentence lived. It didn't guess. It cited exact clauses, returned specific dates, listed precise sources. Cross-document queries looked the same, just larger. Operation Copilot Query Multi, libraries, NDAs, MSAs, filters, auto-renewal, EOS, yes, notice window 60. The log listed materialized filter, auto-renewal, true, notice window 59. Item refs enumerated both types with their clause span pointers. No export job, no background indexing to an external service. The tenant owned the question and the answer. Handoffs left receipts of their own. E-signature requests appeared as Power Automate runs, with correlation IDs linking the item URL, the signer identities, and the final signature status X complete. Each run had a start time, action history, and an outcome. A companion SharePoint version. Created event recorded the executed PDF with execution date and signer fields written. There was no separate portal download. No manual upload. The loop closed inside the site. Approvals told on themselves. Operation, list item updated with comment entries marking awaiting internal, awaiting client, and the identity that advanced state. A derived column, days in state, incremented daily. A scheduled job wrote the value without touching file content. When scope changed, a version created event preceded a flow resubmitted entry. The past remained visible beside the present. Ambiguity flags were visible too. Extraction wrote a confidence annotation when terms included reasonable period or cross-document dependencies like unless otherwise agreed in the applicable SOW. The log didn't resolve ambiguity. It recorded that the model didn't claim certainty. A small critical distinction. Decision support, not automation. Security remained ordinary. No sharing link created entries for public or anonymous access. External user accessed equals false across the sample. Conditional access applied the same policies the tenant already enforced. Device compliance states showed as expected. If someone without permission asked a question, the The Copilot query returned 0 item refs. Security trimming did the quiet work. Failures were boring and documented. A flow once halted after an owner changed a column's internal name. The run history recorded a missing field error. The fix restored the name. Subsequent runs wrote status normally. A missing required field in drop-off triggered a validation error. The item stayed in the staging view until completed. Administrative fixes, not architectural repairs. The PowerBI evidence view had no secret pipeline. Data source, SharePoint list. Transform, none. Measures computed on extracted columns. Refresh history matched scheduled times. No CSV exports lived in downloads, no shadow registers. A wall of repeated facts drawn from the same columns. The agent read. One more check, close the loop. We pulled a sample of 10 answers at random. For each, we followed the clause span to the contract text and compared it to the answer. 10 of 10 matched the cited line. Where ambiguity was flagged, the flag was present. Where cross-references existed, both sides were recorded. The contracts didn't change, only the question did. The logs didn't perform, they described. Who asked? What was answered? Which columns changed? Which files were cited? When signatures occurred? Where labels persisted? If someone ever asks, how do you know? This is how. A trail that repeats the same behavior under the same rules every time. The evidence kept repeating. The metrics that actually move. Cycle time went first. Not the theoretical kind, the lived kind. Time to answer. Before, expiry checks took days because someone had to read. After, minutes because the answer arrived with a citation. Time to locate controlling clause. Before, a half hour of skimming. After, a click into the exact span. Time to confirm renewal logic. Before, a calendar comb. After, a filtered list with sources. It wasn't a stopwatch trick. It was latency removed where reading used to sit. We saw it across the 4 use cases. NDAs. Do we have one and is it current? Days collapsed to minutes. MSAs, which require notice under 60 days. Minutes, not afternoons. SOWs, awaiting signature beyond 7 days. Instant because state lived as data. DPAs, where is incident notice over 72 hours? Minutes, with lines already highlighted. Different documents. Same fall in cycle time. Errors didn't decline, they disappeared. No missed renewals because expiring in 30 and expiring in 60/90 weren't spreadsheets. They were views bound to extracted dates, updated without ceremony. No wrong version signed because status, execution date, and signer lived next to version history and signature ran inside the tenant. No misread clause because every assertion carried its paragraph. The difference was quiet, nothing to fix because nothing slipped. Process containment registered as a metric you can describe without a graph. Files never left Microsoft 365. Signatures happened inside. Status came back as columns. Approvals logged in the item. PowerBI read the same library. Every answer, every handoff, every receipt landed in one place. Containment wasn't a slogan. It was a pattern the logs kept repeating. Adoption showed up as absence. Fewer where is it emails. Fewer shared trackers pretending to be systems. Fewer urgent pings before quarter close. People stopped asking location questions because answer questions were faster. The signal was subtle and strong, silence where noise used to live. We watched repeatability become its own metric. Answered with citations wasn't an option, it was the default. 10 for 10 sample checks matched their spans. Ambiguities were flagged the same way every time. Cross-references linked both sides the same way every time. The evidence kept repeating. Governance continuity stayed measurable without theatrics. Labels persisted across extraction. Record states locked at execution according to policy. Retention triggers tied to execution or expiry visible in the pane. Audit entries logged who asked, what was answered, which files were cited. Security trimming hid what should be hidden naturally. Metrics didn't need a dashboard. They lived in behaviors that didn't break. A compact scorecard emerged, spoken, not shown. Cycle time, days to minutes. Errors avoided, missed renewals, wrong versions, misreads, 0 observed in the sample window. Containment, one system, one trail, no exports. Adoption, email and spreadsheet decay replaced by questions with receipts. Repeatability. Answers arrived with the same backing across quarters. Nothing flashy happened. Alternate readings were entertained. Could discipline alone have reduced cycle time? Perhaps for a sprint. But discipline doesn't attach clause spans to each answer. Could a register have kept renewals current? For a while, registers drift, columns don't, when extraction fills them. The tenant's metrics relied on the same premise. Ask the repository for facts, expect citations. One more measure mattered to auditors. Observability, not slideware, not theater. A question produced a log entry. An extraction produced a column change. A signature produced a version and a status. A PowerBI refresh recorded its source and time. Each element observable, each step retraceable. Measurable because it already was. The contracts didn't change. The files stayed on the shelves. The shelves stayed in the room. The labels stayed on. Only the question changed. And when the question changed, the metrics moved in ways that are hard to argue with and easy to verify under the same lights, watched by the same cameras. Objections, neutralized, security, accuracy, and new system anxiety. Security comes first. It always does. The files never left Microsoft 365. No sidecar repository, no vendor mirror. SharePoint remained the store. Sensitivity labels persisted. Record labels locked where policy required it. Retention triggers tied to execution or expiry, same as before. Security trimming hid what should be hidden. Audit logs recorded who asked, what was answered, and which files were cited. Your existing governance was still there the whole time. The reasonable challenge is data loss prevention. DLP watched in motion before. It watched in motion after. Answers didn't bypass controls, they inherited them. A user without permission still saw nothing. The agent used the asker's access, not its own. No sharing links appeared. No anonymous tokens. No exports to CSV to fuel a dashboard. Containment wasn't a claim. It was an absence of drift. Accuracy isn't a promise, it's an observable behavior. Clause spans were literal. The answers carried their own citations back to the paragraph that governed the fact. When language was clear, the span matched the answer. When language was ambiguous, the model flagged it. Reasonable period, unless otherwise agreed in the applicable SOW. The system didn't decide, it exposed the edge so humans could. Decision support, not automation. A quiet test matters more than a benchmark. 10 answers sampled at random. 10 spans matched their claims. Where cross-references existed, both sides were linked. Where ambiguity lived, it was marked. That's repeatability. That's verifiability. That's what auditors accept because they can retrace it without theater. Then comes the anxiety. Is this a new system? It isn't. SharePoint held the documents before. It holds them after. Document processing wrote to columns you already owned. Knowledge Agent answered against those columns. PowerBI showed patterns from the same library. Power Automate moved approvals and wrote back status. Purview governed all of it. Nothing was replaced, nothing was migrated. Only the question changed. Alternate explanations deserve respect. Could disciplined metadata have solved this? Partially. But metadata, without citations, still forces a reread for every exception. Could a spreadsheet register do it? For a sprint. But spreadsheets drift. They duplicate. They don't respect permissions. They don't cite the line that matters. Both fall short where repeatability and evidence are required. Legal wasn't convinced at first. They asked what happens when language is subtle. The system surfaced both sides, the clause that looked mutual and the narrowing carve-out 6 lines later. It didn't settle the interpretation. It accelerated the path to it. Time moved from discovery to judgment. Minutes, not afternoons. It raised the quiet question about scale. Libraries can hold millions of items, but hygiene matters. The answer relied on ordinary practice, content types, consistent columns, drop-off discipline, required fields. Extraction wrote values, views narrowed focus. The agent ran filters. PowerBI bound to the same source. Scale wasn't a feature, it was the absence of special cases. Compliance asked about records. Records remained records. Labels didn't unlock to extract. The processor changed columns, not content. Event-based retention still started when execution inched the clock. Disposition stayed under policy. The presence of answers didn't weaken governance. It made governance visible in the same pane as the evidence. Cost anxiety hides behind tooling. This wasn't a rip and replace, no new platform to train, no data migration to fund. The services already existed in the tenant. The effort sat in naming columns well, enforcing intake discipline, and letting the services do what they were built to do. The return arrived as time you didn't spend reading. Change management sounded larger than it was. Behavior shifted because answers with citations were faster than hunts for files. People followed speed. Legal verified faster. Finance spotted variance faster. Project managers acted on state faster. Training became short. Ask for facts, not file names. Verify by clicking the citation, not by rereading the PDF. Risk didn't vanish. It became legible. If a clause deviated, it surfaced with the sentence that proved it. If a notice window was short, it appeared as a number backed by text. If ambiguity remained, it was labeled. That's the posture a regulator expects. Show me, don't tell me. One more concern lingered: lock-in. The opposite happened. By keeping contracts in SharePoint, with facts as columns, the organization stayed portable inside its own tenant. No silos, no proprietary indexes, just documents, metadata, and logs that already belonged to you. Security stayed ordinary. Accuracy stayed observable. Anxiety had nowhere to attach. The contracts didn't change. The shelves didn't move. The guards didn't leave. Only the question changed. And because the question changed, Objections had to contend with evidence, not intent. Quiet starts, minimal change pathways that work. Start small. One library, not a program, not a rollout. Pick a place where the documents already behave. NDAs or MSAs work because the shapes repeat. The point isn't scale, it's proof. Begin with intake discipline. Turn on the drop-off library. Require 2 fields at arrival: counterparty and business owner. That's it. Don't add 8 more nice-to-have fields. People won't fill them, and you don't need them. Drafts remain contained, permissions remain ordinary, the shelf doesn't move. Name the columns you intend to trust: effective date, expiration date, auto-renewal, notice window, payment terms, governing law, signature status. Keep names boring. The thing most people miss is that naming is the only design you need to get right. The processor can't write to creative labels. It writes to columns. Apply one extraction model, not 10. Start with dates, renewals, and parties. That's enough to create motion. The model reads the file where it sits. It writes those fields. If the text is ambiguous, it flags. If the clause is standard, it cites. Clarity first, completeness later. Turn on asking for a small group. Site owners: one legal contact, one business owner who actually chases contracts. Give the knowledge agent permission to answer in that library. Then seed the behavior with 2 plain questions. Which NDAs expire in the next 30 days? And which MSAs have auto-renewal with notice under 60 days? Let the answers show up with citations. Don't announce a pilot, just answer questions. Publish one evidence view. PowerBI is fine. PNP search is fine. Minimal polish. Bind it directly to the library. Show counts by expiry window, auto-renewal prevalence, and notice window distribution. Nothing else. No vanity charts. Pin it on a wall where the people who ask questions can see repetition. The evidence kept repeating. Leave Purview alone. Your retention labels, record states, and sensitivity rules already work. Don't unbolt anything. You're proving continuity, not change. If someone asks what moved, your answer should be only columns. Within a week, add 1 more column that ties action to state, days to expiry, or days in state. Let the system compute it. Save a view that filters on the obvious thresholds. That's enough for the first quiet win. Expiring in 30 appears without effort. Awaiting signature 7 days appears without emails. People notice because minutes replace afternoons. Expect one inconvenient hiccup, a flow that depends on a renamed column, a required field someone removed. Fixes are administrative. Restore the name, restore the rule. The point of starting small is that you can repair without theater. Add 1 skeptical observer, legal or compliance. Ask them to pick 3 contracts at random from an answer list. Follow the citations into the text. If a clause is unclear, the ambiguity flag should be visible. If a cross-reference exists, both sides should open. This is the moment to earn trust, not by persuasion, by retracing. Avoid the training day. Send a single short note. Ask for facts, not file names. Verify with the citation, not with a reread. If you must explain more, you're doing too much. The system convinces by making the path shorter, not by making the deck longer. After 2 weeks, widen the circle by 1 library, not by a department. SOWs are a good second step because state lives as data. Add signature status, awaiting role, and days in state. Let the e-signature handoff write back execution. Ask the one question every project lead cares about. Which SOWs have been awaiting client signature more than 7 days? Answers arrive with receipts. Containment proves itself. Resist the instinct to enumerate features. Keep the rhythm. Intake, extract, ask, cite, decide, repeat. If someone asks for a roadmap, point to the wall. Patterns over time. The evidence kept repeating. You'll know it's working when questions change tense. Fewer. Where is the contract? More. What does the contract require? That shift arrives without a kickoff, without a champion, without a portal. It arrives because the room already had answers. You just let them answer back. Nothing flashy happens. No migrations, no new platforms. One library becomes two. Two views become four. The same labels stay on. The same shelves hold. The same logs record. Only the question changes. And once the question changes, minimal change is enough. The evidence wall patterns, not dashboards. The wall didn't predict. It confirmed. A single view bound to one truth, the library. No exports, no side registers. Counts by week. Expiries by window. Auto renewal prevalence. Notice distributions. Payment term variants. Jurisdiction clusters. All drawn from columns the system already wrote. Boring by design. What repeated was simple. The same queries produced the same shapes. NDAs flowed in bursts, trade show weeks, partner onboardings, then quieted. The expiring in 30 count rose and fell in a gentle sawtooth. No interventions, just dates becoming rows, then leaving. The pattern didn't need color, it needed to be visible. The MSAs told on themselves. A thin stripe of net 60 vendors held quarter after quarter. A small ridge of 30-day notice windows persisted where policy preferred 60. Outliers didn't shout. They sat against the backdrop of conformity. Finance didn't argue charts. They clicked a bar and saw the same sentences they'd already accepted, now repeated across time. The evidence kept repeating. SOWs displayed latency as a rhythm. Awaiting internal spikes clustered mid-month. A waiting client lingered over holidays. The counts didn't shame. They informed. Project leads learned to look at the wall on Mondays, not for a dashboard thrill, but for a list of states that needed decisions. Status moved because state became public. DPAs surfaced exposure without panic. The share of undue delay notices stayed low. The slice of SEC references shifted as templates updated. A small stubborn wedge of unilateral audit rights held in one region. Compliance didn't build a slide. They opened the list behind the wedge and read the clauses. Patterns over time, receipts on click. What surprised wasn't trend lines. It was low variance where everyone expected chaos. Extraction wrote renewal logic the same way across messy histories. Knowledge agent cited indemnity with identical span behavior across formats. The wall made consistency legible. The thing most people miss is how calming repetition becomes when it's grounded. The evidence kept repeating. We resisted embellishment. No drill circus. No animated transitions. 3 pivots, maximum. Each tile a doorway back to the shelf. Vendor names under net 60, agreements with notice under 60 days, SOWs awaiting signature beyond 7, DPAs with breach windows over 72 hours. Click, close, decide. The path stayed short. Stakeholders trusted it because nothing lived behind it that didn't already exist. Data source, the library. Measures arithmetic on columns, refresh, scheduled, visible. There were no CSVs in someone's downloads, no analytics workspace holding a parallel truth. If an auditor asked where did this come from, the answer was a URL, not a diagram. The wall taught restraint. When someone asked for bookings versus contract value versus margin trend, the response stayed the same. This is a contract wall, not a revenue model. It shows what agreements require, when they renew, where they deviate, and how long states persist. If you want more, ask a better contract question. The room answered those. We added one tile we didn't expect to keep. Ambiguity flags over time. It held. The count of reasonable period clauses trended down after a template change. The count of unless otherwise agreed in the applicable SOW remained steady. Legal used the tile as a nudge, not a scoreboard. Ambiguity didn't vanish, it became measurable. Security never changed for the wall to work. Security trimming filtered tiles the same way it filtered answers. A user saw only their data shaped as counts. Sensitivity labels stayed on, records stayed locked, retention remained visible. Evidence can sit in public view when it's trimmed by design. The quiet payoff arrived when the wall became a habit. Monday check-ins replaced status meetings. Quarter-end escalation softened because variance was visible all quarter. The PowerBI app icon didn't become a destination. The library did. The wall was just a mirror. Nothing flashy happened. No storytelling with gradients. No KPI theater. A surface that reflected the same answers the agent gave, repeated over time, under the same lights, on the same shelves. The contracts didn't change. Only the question did. Recurring pattern, from files to answers, across all 4 cases. The pattern didn't start with the feature. It started with discipline, intake, extract, ask, cite, decide, repeat. 4 different contract types. The same backbone, the same behavior under governance that never moved. NDAs showed volume without drama. A drop-off library, 2 required fields, and an extraction pass that wrote effective date, expiry date, renewal logic, notice window. The knowledge agent answered questions with lists, not hunches, and every list carried citations back to the sentence that controlled it. Risk wasn't argued, it was verified. MSAs exposed money hiding in the middle. Columns for auto-renewal, notice windows, payment terms, limitation of liability. Questions ran as filters. Answers arrived as rows with clause spans. Finance stopped debating discovery. They started deciding acceptance. The wall confirmed variance across quarters. Patterns, not theater. SOWs proved that friction is a state problem, not a content problem. Status lived as data. Signature ran inside Microsoft 365. Handoffs wrote back to the item. The question, where is it, became, how long has it been here? The agent returned a waiting client, older than 7 days, with receipts. Latency left the inbox and appeared in a column. DPAs put exposure under lights without alarms. Data categories, transfer mechanisms, breach windows, audit rights, governing law. One query surfaced undue delay. Another grouped SCC versions by citation. Ambiguity was marked where it lived. Decision support, not automation. Compliance read the sentence that would matter later. Across all 4, the same signals appeared. Cycle time fell from days to minutes because answers were grounded. Errors stopped happening because lists were views, not spreadsheets. Process stayed inside Microsoft 365 because nothing left the tenant to finish a loop. Adoption showed up as silence because questions with receipts were faster than hunts for files. Citations did more than persuade. They stabilized trust. A clause span is a small, precise thing. It travels well in conversations that used to move on anecdotes. Show me became a click. Is that true? Became, do we accept it? Legal and finance worked on judgment, not retrieval. Governance continuity did more than reassure. It prevented drift. SharePoint remained the store. Purview labels persisted, records locked on execution, retention tied to events, security trimming filtered lists and walls the same way it filtered libraries. Answers arrived exactly where controls already stood. No silos, no mirrors. Alternate explanations never fit across all 4. Spreadsheets can list expiries, they can't cite clauses. Email reminders can nudge approvals, they can't write days in state tied to version history. External portals can sign, they split the trail. The recurring pattern required one surface, one store, one set of rules. The stack's ordinariness mattered. SharePoint libraries and columns. Document processing writing values. Knowledge agent answering against those values with citations. PowerBI reflecting repetition from the same source. Power Automate closing loops and writing back. No new platform, no migration. The same tools aligned. One more repetition closed the arc. Random samples of answers traced back to the same line in the same files, quarter after quarter. Ambiguity flags persisted where language stayed soft. Cross-references linked both sides where precedents lived. Observability stayed intact in logs. The evidence kept repeating. The contracts didn't get smarter. They got questioned differently. Files remained files. They just answered back when asked for facts. Under the same lights, on the same shelves, with the same guards. Nothing new was installed. Something new was noticed. If you remember one thing, remember this. Your contracts already answer questions when you let columns carry facts and citations return the lines that govern them. Try it tomorrow. Ask one plain question in a live tenant and follow the citation to the exact clause. If that clicks, subscribe for the follow-up on scaling knowledge agents without breaking governance. End here. Unresolved edge case where humans stay in the loop. Some edges don't close. They shouldn't. Clause ambiguity lives where language is deliberate. Within a reasonable period, unless otherwise agreed in the applicable SOW. Material breach is determined by. The system does not resolve these. It flags them. It anchors the flag to the sentence that creates the uncertainty. It keeps the human in the loop on purpose. Rare contract types behave the same way. Bespoke research agreements, one-off JV term sheets, old scans with inconsistent pagination, non-English text that mixes jurisdictional phrasing with local idiom. Extraction can read the obvious dates, parties, and still mark the rest as low confidence. It will surface the lines it thinks control. It will not pretend to understand what the business is willing to accept. That remains judgment. Non-English documents add a layer. Governing law phrases shift in meaning across languages. The model can capture a renewal date and still flag the clause because the nuance of tacit reconduction isn't a binary field. The behavior stays consistent. Cite the text, show the span, mark the uncertainty. Decision support, not automation. Bespoke amendments create cross-document edges. An SOW that overrides the MSA's notice window in a footnote. A side letter that narrows indemnity for a single project. The agent can follow the cross-reference and cite both sides. It can't decide precedents in a vacuum. It won't. It will show the trail so humans can decide with the right pages open. Poor scans are noise, not failure. OCR will misread a digit. The system exposes the column, the span, and the file. A human corrects the column once. The view updates everywhere. The audit log records the change. The workflow depends on visibility, not perfection. These edges don't weaken the claim. They define it. The store remains governed. The facts remain citable. The model's restraint is part of the trust posture. Where certainty ends, flags begin. Where language is soft, the system stays quiet and points. Where stakes are high, humans decide. If a regulator asks, "Did you know?" the trail is still the answer. A flagged ambiguity with a span is knowledge. A low confidence field with a pointer is knowledge. A cross-reference with both links is knowledge. Not closure, not theater. Just enough to move judgment to the right page faster. Nothing new was installed to handle the edges. The behavior stayed the same. Ask, cite, decide. The guardrails remained. The shelves remained. The questions just reached places where silence is part of the method. Write for truth first. Extend for curiosity second. Leave space for uncertainty where the document asks you to. That's how answers stay trustworthy. That's how silence feels intentional, not empty. Source discipline and limits. Facts stayed within Microsoft 365. SharePoint libraries, columns you can name and verify. Knowledge agent answering with citations. Document processing writing metadata. PowerBI reading the same source. Power Automate recording handoffs. Purview enforcing labels, retention and audit. Nothing beyond that stack was claimed. The clause extraction we referenced maps to Microsoft's document processing for Microsoft 365 and AI Builder capabilities. Parties, dates, renewal logic, payment terms, governing law. Output as column updates, not content edits. Where language was vague, we stated ambiguity was flagged. That's a practice pattern, not a guarantee of edge case resolution. Knowledge agent behavior was described as question first with citations. We did not claim model internals, training data, or accuracy percentages. We claimed observable outcomes. Rows returned, filters matching columns, span pointers back to text, and audit entries recording who asked and what was cited. Decision support, not automation. E-signature references stayed inside Microsoft 365 integrations, requests issued from Word or a SharePoint item, status written back as columns, executed copies saved in the same library with execution date and signer recorded. We did not assert specific providers or pricing, only that signatures and status remained contained. Purview governance remained as described in public guidance. Sensitivity labels persist on content, record labels log according to policy, retention can be event-based, execution or expiry, DLP and security trimming continue to apply. We did not alter those controls in any narrative step. We observed them operating alongside answers. Power BI was used as an evidence wall. Data source, the contract library. Measures, arithmetic on existing columns. No side registers, no exports, patterns over time, not forecasts. We avoided claims of predictive accuracy or causal inference, only repetition drawn from the same truth others could inspect. Performance statements stayed qualitative and verifiable by workflow, days to minutes, on time to answer, not end-to-end legal adjudication. Errors stopped happening, limited to missed renewals and wrong version signatures within the observed sample, not a universal guarantee. Where we said sample, we meant human spot checks with clause span verification. Limits matter. Rare clause types, non-English contracts, poor scans, or highly bespoke amendments can reduce extraction reliability. Human review remains required for interpretation, negotiation, and acceptance. The system can surface the line. It cannot decide what your risk appetite is. Scope matters. We did not cover Azure OpenAI internals, custom LLM fine-tuning, or heavy Power Apps UI. We did not replace legal review, procurement policy, or records management programs. We showed how existing services can expose evidence inside the tenant you already govern. When uncertainty remained, we said so. No secret sources, no invented benchmarks, the contracts didn't change. Only the question did. The governance stayed visible the whole time.